It started with a knock on my door, a soft, hesitant knock that I almost didn't hear over the sound of the rain tapping against the windows. When I opened it, there she was, Clara. Her dark hair was damp, clinging to her pale face, and her eyes were wide, almost pleading. She apologized for bothering me so late, said she lived across the hall and had run out of sugar. Could she borrow some? I smiled, handed her the sugar, and watched as she disappeared back into the shadows of the hallway. That was the first time I saw her. The first time I felt that strange pull, like she was something out of a dream or a nightmare. It was October 12th, 2019, when I moved into the apartment on Beacon Street in Boston. The kind of place you'd see in a postcard, brick walls, ivy creeping up the sides, and a stoop that looked like it had been there since the Revolutionary War. The rent was suspiciously cheap, but I didn't ask questions. I was just happy to have a place to call my own after months of couch surfing. But looking back, I should have known something was off. The way the landlord avoided eye contact when he handed me the keys, the way the neighbors whispered as I carried my boxes inside, and then there was the smell, a faint, musty odor that no amount of cleaning could erase. It was like the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. But I didn't notice any of that at first, not until I met her. Her name was Clara. She lived in the apartment across the hall, and she introduced herself with a shy smile that made my heart skip a beat. She had this ethereal beauty about her, pale skin, dark hair that fell in soft waves around her face, and eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 secrets. We hit it off immediately, and before I knew it, we were spending every evening together, talking for hours over cups of tea or glasses of wine. Clara was unlike anyone I'd ever met. She was quiet, almost mysterious, but there was a warmth to her that drew me in. She told me she worked as a librarian at the Boston Public Library, though I never saw her leave for work. She always seemed to be home, waiting for me, as if her entire world revolved around our time together. I didn't mind. In fact, I loved it. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged somewhere, with someone. But as the weeks went by, strange things began to happen. Small things at first, like the temperature in my apartment dropping suddenly even though the heat was on full blast, or the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside my door when I knew no one was there. I'd hear whispers late at night, soft and indistinct, like someone was speaking just out of earshot. I told myself it was just the old building settling, or maybe my imagination running wild. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Then there were the dreams. Vivid, unsettling dreams where I'd see Clara standing at the foot of my bed, her face pale and her eyes hollow. She'd reach out to me, her fingers brushing against my skin, and I'd wake up gasping for air, drenched in sweat. I tried to shake it off, to convince myself it was just stress or lack of sleep, but the dreams kept coming, each one more intense than the last. One night, after a particularly bad dream, I decided to confront Clara. I knocked on her door, my heart pounding in my chest. She answered almost immediately, as if she'd been waiting for me. Her smile was as warm as ever, but there was something in her eyes, something dark and unreadable. "Clara," I began, my voice trembling, "I need to ask you something. Have you been in my room at night?" She tilted her head, her expression one of genuine confusion. "Of course not. Why would you think that?" I hesitated, unsure of how to explain the dreams, the whispers, the cold spots. But before I could say anything, she reached out and took my hand. Her touch was ice cold, sending a shiver down my spine. "You've been working too hard," she said softly. "You need to rest. Come, sit with me." I let her lead me to the couch, my mind still racing. But as we sat there talking and laughing like we always did, the fear began to fade. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was just overworked, letting my imagination get the better of me. But then, a few days later, I found something that shattered any illusion of normalcy. I was cleaning out a closet in my apartment, trying to make more space, when I stumbled upon an old box tucked away in the corner. Inside were photographs, letters, and a diary. The photos were of Clara, or at least someone who looked exactly like her, but the dates on the back of the photos were from the 1940s. My hands shook as I flipped through the diary. It belonged to a woman named Clara Whitaker, who had lived in the apartment building in the 1940s. She wrote about her life, her dreams, and her love for a man named Thomas. But the last entry was different. It was frantic, almost illegible, as if written in a state of panic. "He's gone. Thomas is gone. They took him away and now they're coming for me. I can hear them outside my door. I don't have much time. If anyone finds this, please tell Thomas I love him. Tell him I'll wait for him no matter how long it takes." The entry ended abruptly, and there was nothing else in the diary. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of what I was reading. Was this some kind of elaborate prank? Or was it possible that Clara, my Clara, was the same woman from the 1940s? I needed answers. I went to the local library and spent hours digging through old newspapers and records. What I found made my blood run cold. Clara Whitaker had indeed lived in the building in the 1940s. She had been engaged to a man named Thomas, but he had died in a tragic accident just weeks before their wedding. Clara had been devastated, and according to the records, she had taken her own life shortly after. I felt sick to my stomach. If Clara was a ghost, then what did that mean for me? Had I been dating a ghost this whole time? The thought was too much to process, but I couldn't ignore the evidence staring me in the face. That night, I confronted Clara again. This time, I didn't hold back. I showed her the diary, the photos, the newspaper clippings. Her expression didn't change. She just looked at me with those dark, unreadable eyes and said, "You weren't supposed to find out." Her voice was different now, cold, distant, almost mechanical. The warmth was gone, replaced by something far more sinister. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. "What are you?" I whispered. She smiled, but it wasn't the smile I had fallen in love with. It was twisted, almost predatory. "I'm Clara," she said. "I've always been Clara, and now you're mine." I turned and ran, slamming the door behind me. I didn't stop until I was outside, the cold night air biting at my skin. I didn't know what to do, where to go. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in that apartment any longer. I spent the next few days crashing at a friend's place, trying to make sense of what had happened. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that Clara was still with me. I'd catch glimpses of her out of the corner of my eye and hear her voice whispering in my ear. It was like she had become a part of me, a shadow I couldn't escape. Eventually, I decided to move out of the apartment. I packed up my things and left, hoping that distance would break whatever hold Clara had on me. But as I drove away, I couldn't help but feel like I was leaving a part of myself behind. To this day, I still don't know what Clara was, or if she was even real. All I know is that I'll never forget her, or the chilling realization that I had been dating a ghost all along. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear her voice calling out to me, begging me to come back, but I never will. I thought I'd found the perfect boyfriend. He was charming, attentive, and always knew how to make me laugh. But there was one problem. He only came out at night, and by the time I realized what he really was, it was too late. This happened in Savannah, Georgia, in the summer of 2015. Savannah is known for its historic charm, cobblestone streets, and, unbeknownst to me at the time, its reputation as one of the most haunted cities in America. I just moved into a quaint apartment on Jones Street, a picturesque lane lined with moss-draped oak trees and antebellum homes. The apartment was old but charming, with high ceilings, creaky wooden floors, and a fireplace that hadn't been used in decades. I was 26 at the time, fresh out of a bad breakup and ready to start over. That's when I met Ethan. It was a warm June evening when I first saw him. I was sitting on the balcony sipping a glass of wine and watching the sunset when I noticed a man standing on the sidewalk below. He was tall, with dark hair and piercing blue eyes, dressed in a crisp white shirt and black slacks. He looked up at me and smiled, a slow, crooked smile that made my stomach flutter. "Hi," he called up to me. "I'm Ethan. I live next door." I waved back, feeling a little flustered. "I'm Amelia. Nice to meet you." We talked for a while, and I found myself drawn to his easy charm and quick wit. He told me he was a writer working on a novel set in Savannah's historic district. He seemed intelligent, kind, and genuinely interested in getting to know me. Over the next few weeks, Ethan and I grew closer. We'd meet for coffee at the Collins Quarter, take long walks through Forsyth Park, and spend hours talking about everything and nothing. He was the perfect gentleman, always opening doors, pulling out chairs, and making me feel like the most important person in the room. But there was something off about him. He only ever came out at night. Whenever I suggested meeting during the day, he'd make excuses. He had to work. He was busy. He wasn't feeling well. At first, I didn't think much of it. But as time went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The first red flag came one evening when I invited Ethan over for dinner. I'd spent hours cooking his favorite meal, shrimp and grits, and set the table with candles and flowers. But when he arrived, he seemed distant. He barely touched his food, and his hands were ice cold, even though it was a warm summer night. "Are you okay?" I asked, concerned. He forced a smile. "I'm fine, just tired." After dinner, we sat on the couch, and I noticed something strange. The candles on the table flickered, even though there was no breeze. The air felt heavy, like the room itself was holding its breath. And when Ethan leaned in to kiss me, his lips were cold, so cold it sent a shiver down my spine. The second red flag came a few nights later. I was walking home from work when I saw Ethan standing on the sidewalk talking to an older woman. She looked upset, gesturing wildly and pointing at him. As I got closer, I heard her say, "You don't belong here. Leave her alone." Ethan turned to me, his expression calm. "Amelia, this is Mrs. Henderson. She's confused." Mrs. Henderson glared at him. "You're not fooling anyone, Ethan. I know what you are." Before I could ask what she meant, Ethan took my arm and led me away. "Don't mind her," he said. "She's always been a little eccentric." The final red flag came one night when I decided to surprise Ethan at his apartment. I'd never been inside before. He always insisted on meeting at my place or going out, but I wanted to do something special for him. I baked a batch of cookies and headed next door, my heart pounding with excitement. But when I knocked on the door, there was no answer. I tried the handle, and to my surprise, it was unlocked. The apartment was dark and empty, the furniture covered in dust sheets. It looked like no one had lived there in years. Confused, I called out Ethan's name. There was no response. I walked through the rooms, my footsteps echoing on the wooden floors until I reached the bedroom. There, on the dresser, was a photograph. It was old and faded, but I could still make out the face. Ethan, dressed in the same white shirt and black slacks he'd been wearing the night we met. My hands trembled as I picked up the photo. On the back, written in faded ink, was a date. June 12th, 1923. I dropped the photo and ran out of the apartment, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't stop running until I reached my own door. I locked it behind me and collapsed on the floor, tears streaming down my face. The next day, I went to the local library and dug through old newspapers. What I found made my blood run cold. On June 12th, 1923, a young man named Ethan Carter had died in a fire that destroyed the building next door to my apartment. He was 27 years old. I never saw Ethan again. I moved out of the apartment a week later, unable to shake the feeling that he was still watching me. To this day, I can't walk down Jones Street without feeling a chill run down my spine.